Yeah, so I'm in applied mathematics, and what I wanted to tell you a little bit about today is a project we've been working on for the last several years now. Slowly, myself and a couple of former PhD students, David Ketchison, who's now at KAUST in Saudi Arabia, and Mauricio, who's now Del Razo, who's now a postdoc in Berlin. So it's a multi-international collaboration that we've been doing through GitHub, of course, mostly. But we've been working on developing a set of Jupyter notebooks that explain that explain how to solve a Riemann problem, which is a particular kind of mathematical problem that comes up in our field of solving wave propagation problems. And the idea is to make it easier for students and researchers to sort of interactively explore solutions to Riemann problems. Yeah, so what is a Riemann problem? Just a 1-minute introduction. So if you have a system of partial differential equations, you're not expected to necessarily understand these, but these are called the shallow water equations for the depth and the momentum of a fluid in a one-dimensional channel. The Riemann problem is kind of the simplest version of this problem where the initial condition is piecewise constant. So for example, a dam break problem where we have higher water on one side of a dam, lower water on the other side, and then you could also have a jump in momentum or velocity from the two sides. Here in the dam break problem, we start with 0 velocity, and what happens is that as time evolves, you get a set of waves that propagate away from this jump discontinuity. And for complicated nonlinear problems, you can understand a lot about how the system behaves by understanding this simple case, and it's a building block for the numerical methods that are used to solve more complicated problems. So for this case, as you can imagine, if you sort of break the dam, here the colors are just sort of a passive tracer that show you how the water flows, but what you see is that you get two different waves, what's called a shock wave moving to the right, or a hydraulic jump in this case, a rarefaction wave moving to left, terminology from gas dynamics where the gas is getting more rarefied as that wave moves through. In this case, the depth is decreasing. And so the idea is that we'd like to have a notebook that allows people to explore this in a lot more detail by not only looking at animations like that, but also being able to do interactive widgets where you can adjust the left and the right state and see how that changes the solution, for example. And so we wanted to write a book where each chapter was a notebook on a different type of wave propagation problem with widgets and animations, but also with cross-referencing equation numbers, bibliographic citations, and so on. We want them to be interactive, but we also wanted to export them to HTML pages where the widgets wouldn't necessarily work, but at least some of the animations would still play, so people could view them on the web without necessarily having to install anything. And then we also are planning to publish a sort of paperback version of this book with SIAM, Society for Industrial and Applied Mathematics, as a reference text that people could read through and then hopefully be led to the notebooks from that. So we wanted to figure out how do we export certain things from the notebooks as well as possible into static figures that make some sense. And so we've been working and sort of struggling with some of these issues for several years now. And then, we also have, of course, a version that runs on the cloud, so you can easily get it started on Binder, for example. So we've been using a bunch of tools for this, but I'm very interested in talking to people about other tools that maybe we should know about, or how we're doing some of these things. We've been using Bookbook, which is a set of tools for converting notebooks into LaTeX that makes it easier to turn into a book. A few of the other extensions here. And then we've got it running. We have a Docker file that makes it relatively easy to use it with Docker. You can also start up a notebook server on Windows Azure, which at the moment is out of date, or on Binder, which I just updated the other day. And with a little luck, we can get back to, how do I get back to the web browser here?
Escape.
Just escape, okay. And then 1 minute warning, so I won't say too much, but if you go to the web page that was linked there, whoops. That's microscopic. Let's see if I can, no, I guess I don't know how to increase the font, sorry. But there are links here to the HTML versions, the GitHub repository, starting up a Binder file. There's a little teaser here where you can actually sort of adjust the left and right states in one of these Riemann problems and see how that changes the structure of the waves. You either get shocks to rarefaction waves depending on how the left and right state are related to each other. And then if you start things up on Binder, I did this just a few minutes ago, and it got started up, and I executed one notebook, which was for the shallow water equations. And so you can see that in the notebook, there are also widgets and places where you can adjust various things. So I will stop there.
Great. Thanks so much, Randy. So our next lightning speaker is Stephen Roberts of the School of Aquatic Fisheries and Sciences. Thank you.
You know how to get to yours?
No, I have no idea.
Is it PowerPoint or PDF?
PDF.
Do you know, Ben, how to get back to his?
It's just a folder. Keep going across the folders on the.
Or the folders?
Just minimize.
Maybe we can minimize that one.
There you go. Should just be.
Right, oh, there it is. Top one?
Yeah.
It's impossible to read on this screen.
Yeah, I know.
And then Control L, I think, makes it full screen.
Okay.
And the top button here is a pointer if you want it.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thanks, Ben. So, what I was going to do in 5 minutes really talk about how we try to be open, do open science, and some of the reproducibility kind of tools we look at, and how we try and use we struggle over this. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we're really excited to get one page together. Sorry. We had one paper that we could go from raw data to the figures in the paper in a single Jupyter notebook, but we've never really achieved that again. So I'm very excited to hear about some of the tools we'll learn about over this weekend. And also take any advice people have, but just to give you an idea of how we kind of work in my research lab. We actually rely on GitHub a lot for issues. That's how we communicate, and this is part of the open science aspects. It helps us work as a lab, but it also helps other people outside address some of our challenges, all of our protocols. Or we use GitHub for that, and we actually use the wiki feature to host, not host, but as landing spots for canonical data. The data is too big to host it, but that's where we go to get some of these data sets we work with. We use Jupyter notebooks a lot. A lot of what we do in the lab is either just plain bash, special genomics types of analysis run on Linux, and sometimes a little bit of R. But most of our lab really relies on Jupyter's for that reproducibility. Some people are moving to R for some of the analysis. We use HIAC a lot for some of the higher workloads, and we use electronic lab notebooks. So every day, everybody in the lab is updating what they do. I want to give you just a couple of kind of case studies of some of the papers where we've kind of make everything reproducible. From one of my PhD students, Jay Diamond. This was several years ago, where all the data is in Dryad, and everybody's working in repositories for the day-to-day stuff, but at the end, when the publication's ready, they kind of clean it up, and hopefully everything's reproducible. This is just kind of a snapshot of his repo, where it's got a series of Jupyter notebooks to do all of his calculations and access to data. I actually picked on him again. This is another more recent one where get a little bit more fancier. It's put a lot more information in the background, just in basic Markdown, with a large series of Jupyter notebooks. And in his case, some of the analysis was done in R and I believe Python too. It's in one repo, but then using Zenodo to kind of snapshot that repository, give it a DOI, and so all of our publications are going to have some DOI associated with a GitHub repository, either through Figshare or Zenodo. And as I mentioned too, we're frustrated about a lot of things. Some of the stuff we do is just it's a non-executable workflow. Some of the stuff we can't get around, working on several machines, specialized machines. There's some stuff that we can supposedly only do on Windows GUIs, which is frustrating. So we just try to document it as much as possible in GitHub in a Markdown file so we can reproduce. So some of our papers are just accompanied by these Markdown files. And finally, just to kind of to end with some of the challenges, and we're always trying to kind of improve upon. So, the ultimate goal is hopefully what we'll hear about, a paper where you can take all the data and all the analysis and reproduce it, which is quite hard. Some of our challenges is kind of the iterative nature of our workflow. This is somebody's repo where they're doing this analysis over and over again. This is genomic analysis. Looking at different variables or optimizing code. Large data size is also a big challenge in where we do it and when we do it, and when we have to move the data off high octane to scratch size and the 30-day limits. That's always hits us every once in a while. Disparate analysis systems, just being able to reproduce within the same operating systems has been a challenge. And at the end of the day, we seem to work hard on these reproducibility products, but I'm always concerned, and probably rightly so, the accessibility of some of these resources that we have, that those that want to reproduce our work because of the nature of the work, they're able to do that. So thanks.
Thanks very much, Stephen. So our third lightning speaker is Nicoleta Cristea, who's a research scientist at the eScience Institute and Freshwater Initiative.
Click on it there.
Thank you.
So we'll just let them change over.
Thank you. As I was introduced, I'm Nicoleta Cristea. I'm with the University of Washington Freshwater Initiative and eScience Institute. I just want to talk today about reproducibility in water research and what we are trying to do to teach the best practices. My talk is kind of similar to Stephen's, but I think it's just providing some recipes and an example of how we want to teach these tools at these events and eScience Hack Weeks. So how bad the situation is. This paper from 2016, it's a water resources research paper, asked this question of most computational hydrology is not reproducible, so is it really science? That's a really hard question because a lot of what we're doing is computer generated. So is this really science if it's not reproducible? And then in 2019, there's another paper that appeared in Nature that was titled Assessing Data Availability and Research Reproducibility in Hydrology and Water Resources. And this Nature paper looked at 360 articles from 6 well-regarded water resources paper, and they tried to reproduce the results, but they were able to reproduce the results from only 4 papers that were published in 2017 out of 360. And so they ranked the reproducibility from these papers as having data availability, that was one level, and then being able to reproduce the results, and then the gold medal would be to, if the results could be not only reproducible but replicable in another environment and for other data sets. And so keeping this in mind, the 2016 paper actually produced this workflow that I think it would be useful for not only for water resources research but also for other research. And I think this in okay. I don't know how to use this, so I'm just going to wave my hands. So conventional workflows start with input data, code, and results, and then the public would just read the publication, and that's it, the end. But to make your publication reproducible, they recommend that we use code plus comments, and then we modularize our code and make it flexible for others to use, and then we add input data, and then we provide example input data plus the code and comments plus test output data, and that would have to be cited, the workflow would have to be cited, reusable, and given a persistent unique persistent identifier, a DOI, and then this can be added to the reproducible publication such that the public would then discover the data, code, and workflows, and use some of the code and workflows in their applications, and then reproduce and validate and finally replicate the results. So this paper really, it's a short paper, but very important in my opinion, because it's giving a pathway towards reproducible computational hydrology, but also it's posing the question of how to change the culture. And so this is an example for what eScience is doing at Hack Weeks. This is Water Hack Week, the first edition ever that happened during the week of March 2019, March 25th to 29th. They consisted in morning tutorials and afternoon project work. And during, I just want to say that not only Water Hack Week, but all the eScience Hack Weeks have reproducible components in their workflows. So what we did here, we used the open source code plus comments with Jupyter Notebooks and Binder. And then we use HydroShare and GitHub as collaboration tools. HydroShare in particular, you can create and make the data available, upload to HydroShare, describe the metadata, share with colleagues, and permanently publish to get a DOI. And then as a last step to test our reproducibility and replicability, we did a user experience on reproducibility test. We asked the teams to clone other teams' GitHub repository and try to reproduce their workflow. So that's why we did a Water Hack Week. I think we're making important steps in teaching reproducibility, and this workshop is definitely one of them. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. So our final lightning speaker for today is Bernease Herman, and she's a data scientist in the eScience Institute. And after Bernease, we will move to hear from Chris Holgarth, who will give us the high-level overview of Binder.
Okay, so let's see if I can get this started. Perfect. All right, hi everyone. So I'm Bernease Herman. I'm a data scientist at the University of Washington eScience Institute. And I'm going to talk about two use cases of Jupyter Notebooks for my interpretable machine learning research. And I apologize for out of order. I neglected my computer. It continued to ask to update, and then it forcefully updated just 20 minutes ago. So went over that. So one use case is for a program that I'm working with called the AI Assembly Program with the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard and the MIT Media Lab. And there we're really thinking about artificial intelligence, ethics, and governance. And the question we had as a group was, do we fully understand how proprietary natural language APIs work, and where are they biased? It's a lot of unnecessary hubbub. But I think what's important about this project and why Jupyter Notebooks were important were that we have a very interdisciplinary group. So we are working with calling these APIs, and we're working with doing some additional coding and analysis on the results of those APIs. But everyone in our group had not used kind of a terminal. They didn't have GitHub accounts. There are a lot of things that they didn't have access to. And so it took a while for us to come to a solution, and we determined to use Jupyter Hub so that we could have a server running with these notebooks. And they were able to very quickly open these notebooks in an environment that already had all of their dependencies installed, and quickly get started with just running a number of cells to see results on whatever new inputs that they had. And I can break out very quickly. Hopefully I have time. This is just locally on my machine. One day. Okay. We will give, oh, there we go, of course, as soon as I try to exit it. So here's an example of a notebook that is failing to run. Again, I apologize for my machine here. And a number of this is kind of work that will be repeated every time, but it's likely that someone in our group would want to go in, install a new data source, or play around with a particular test sentence. Lots of text in here. And really what they're interested in is just this kind of result here. And so this was a really convenient way for them to be able to interact, learn Jupyter notebooks, and participate in the analysis despite not having some of the programming prerequisites. Okay, and so the other example would be my interpretability research. And so the question I'm asking there are, what do we do when our models are right for the wrong reasons, and how would we know? So often we think of especially large neural networks or complex models as kind of black boxes. There's lots of parameters. We don't exactly know what's happening, even the experts who made them. And so here's an example from a very popular paper in that space called LIME. This is a model, an image classifier that's trying to predict, is the image on the left a husky the dog or a wolf? And the classifier predicted that this was a wolf. It's actually a husky. And before kind of interpretability, we wouldn't know why, but now we can see an explanation. These are some of the pixels that were important in that prediction, and it looks like just snow. And so I'll skip this, but I'll say that I'm primarily concerned in how do we evaluate those explanations that we generate? How do we make sure that they are fair and truthful? And one really interesting case about this is that a lot of the models that we're actually going to explore already produce either notebooks or have pretty well-maintained GitHub repositories. So the majority of our work is really just taking some of their examples with new data sets and then generating our evaluation metrics on top. And so that's a pipeline that I've seen to be very fruitful in the beginning of this interpretability research, is downloading one of these repositories. Sometimes they have notebooks, like this case, sometimes they don't, but then doing our evaluation on top of that inside of a notebook. And that's all I have. Thank you.